Thank you for joining me, Dr. Lewis, on to talk about your amazing chapter in the Handbook of Research on challenging deficit thinking for exceptional education improvement. That is a mouthful. Really kind of digging into your chapter, it begins with this really cool vignette about Don Haskins becoming the head basketball coach at Texas Western University, and the deficit thinking regarding Black athletes, Black scholar athletes, that whole intersection of people, of all the possible ways to kind of introduce your chapter. Why that one?
So I first of all, I love movies. I spend a lot of time watching TVs and movies. Potentially in another life, I was a movie critic. But while it's a very entertaining movie, right? As a lot of movies are, if you spend too much time either thinking or overthinking, you might find things, text and subtext and alternative meanings that potentially the writers or producers, directors didn't intend for you to find. And I just spent a lot of time just thinking about the movie, which again is very entertaining. But, here's a guy who's a coach who gets all these Black players because he doesn't have the budget, and the school is not the kind of school that attracts like high quality white players. But he gets all these Black players from across the country. Immediately notices when he brings them back to Texas, to the university, that despite their geographic differences and how they were raised, on the court, they all speak the same language, and even off the court as well. And then because, these Black athletes, according to his white counterparts, were not disciplined enough to play basketball the right way. Yeah, they're fast and they're strong, but they lack the discipline or the intelligence to play this sport, this white man's sport, which it was at the time. You're making a mistake, and not only should you not recruit any, like how dare you recruit so many and like try to start all of them at the same time. And so he feeds into that, and what does he do? He teaches them how to play basketball correctly, i.e. the white way. And he teaches them all of these plays, and they learn it because they're told to, but they lose doing it. And finally, the kids, the players rather, because they're not kids, these are young men, they say, let us play the way we know how to play. You saw how we play when you recruited us, when you came to Harlem and Detroit and from wherever to come and see us. Let us play how we know how to play.
Right.
He lets them do that. They start winning. It's like magic. And not only do they start winning, they make it all the way to the championship. But then he gets to the championship where there's national press and all of these top tier universities who are making fun of him. And so he says, well, we need to go back to incorporating the plays that I taught you. And suddenly they start losing again, on the verge of elimination. And of course, there's some of the Hollywood element that romanticizes everything and like why he makes the decision to go back to allow them to play their natural way. But the point is they do. And he starts in the championship match with an entire starting lineup of all Black players, which had never been done before. And not only do they win, they crush like the number 1 seed defending champions, I think was Duke University. And then I thought about it through that lens, but then I thought about it through entertainment and in other areas of sports where Black people were historically kind of shut out. And once they were allowed in, and to not just allowed in, but to participate in their true authentic selves, not only did they find success, but their way of doing things eventually became the standard. Prior to, these Black athletes playing basketball, like, again, the dunks, the alley hoops, like all the things which back then was too undisciplined, it was uncultured. It's now the standard of the game. And you think about that in music, you think about it in entertainment, you think about it in other sports as well. I remember, and I played tennis, I remember when Venus and Serena first came around and they had the beads in the hair and they were hitting the ball harder than anyone else. And it was that's not how women's tennis is supposed to be played. And now everybody, black, white, you name it, they're trying to meet their standards. And so it just made me think, if that's the case in sports and entertainment, why is it far-fetched to believe that the same is true in academics? That and I remember I was doing a study, and a parent said, if you have an elephant, a fish, and a monkey competing in a tree climbing contest, of course the monkey's always going to win. Does it mean that the elephant and the fish are stupid or that they're deficient? No. You are asking them to perform on standards that are outside of their realm.
Right.
And so at what point do we begin to recognize in a real way? I think a lot of people understand it theoretically, that our education system is grounded in white supremacy and was founded and based entirely on white middle class standards, and we're asking folks to perform white middle class standards. At what point do we begin to like really realize how what does that mean for students who are not raised by white middle class standards?
Right.
And so that's really how I came to that decision point. I know that was a long answer, but hopefully it makes sense.
It does, and it leads me right into the next question. I've got an interesting section that it reads, first, Kim and Hargrove in 2013 described their resilience as the ability to succeed academically despite the challenging and difficult life circumstances and the risk factors that hinder them from success. For Black boys, resilience is considered as the process of and the achieved results which make up the Black boys' experience to become successful in their academics in face of numerous barriers and oppression present in the public education system. Therefore, resilience is an essential indicator of success in all life and academic achievement because it is an act and a personal attribute among the Black boys. However, resilience among these individuals is unfortunately and regretfully not often recognized, valued, or celebrated in American society. So from that quote, I'm wondering if you would like to add anything from your lived experience and your kind of concept of resiliency from your career in education.
Yeah, so two thoughts, because so the quote stands true, but I'm also conflicted about it, right? And I know it's my own work and I've cited it. And on one hand, which also directly answers the quote, it's not valued, resilience in Black boys or Black men, in black folks in general, is not valued or celebrated or really recognized in the way it is, because there is this, not even subtle, there's this kind of overt expectation that Black folks should always be resilient. Yes. That if you think about it in kind of everyday pop culture, as you hear conversations around slavery and racism, get over it. There's this idea that we should always, turn the other cheek and find a way to persevere and be resilient and have grit, which a lot of schools try to have as a core value, right? Like, it doesn't matter that what we're teaching you and how we're teaching you and where we're teaching you is oppressive and is trying to discredit who you are as an individual and minimize your culture and all these other things. Have grit, because you need to push through. It doesn't matter that, despite the societal circumstances that you have to navigate and the duality that you need to perform in on a daily basis, where you are held to one set of standards in the school building, but then when you leave and you have to go home to wherever you live, it's an entirely different universe. You need to have grit. So, there's this overt expectation that no matter what's thrown at us, we should be able to survive. And that's really why it's not valued, because it's expected. And it's kind of in that sense become a commodity. Whereas other folks, right? You think about other folks when they go through a hardship and they make it to the other side of the hardship oh my God, like, how did you do it? There are many folks out there who are not Black, who make lots of money of their stories of resiliency. But how often are Black and brown folks celebrated in the same way, or able to monetize their own struggles that they have to go through? First of all, it's, well, why did you have to go through those struggles? What did you do to put yourself in that struggle?
Mhm.
Oh, and of course you're going to overcome that struggle, because that's what Black folks do.
Right.
And so on one hand, if I never if I've never praised personally for my resiliency and my grit and my ability to keep pushing forward, I'd be okay with that, because quite honestly, it's exhausting.
Yes.
It's exhausting always being resilient. It's exhausting always having to not just face all of these challenges, but to overcome them. And even when you do overcome them, it's, of course you're supposed to overcome them. So I'm not gonna value the fact that you overcame it or celebrate it, or even credit it as being an asset, so to speak. So that would be the only thing I would add to that.
You discuss in the how the educational system currently uses language to really manipulate and invalidate the Black boy. So you had written that Kirkland in 2011, in his research on literacy practices for engaging Black boys, recounts the observation of Mr. Kegler's 11th grade ELA class, in which one of the Black male students, Derek, describes his disdain for Beowulf. I didn't like it either. I'm right there with Derek. The text being studied at the beginning of the semester. For Derek, Beowulf was boring, unfamiliar, far-fetched, unimportant, soulless, and oppressive. I love his language there. Derek was skeptical of the text and even suggested that the text was used as a ploy to brainwash him and the other Black students. Derek stated that he could not read in Mr. Kegler's class because it makes him feel like Mr. Kegler is attempting to really manipulate him and change how he thinks and views himself. Derek explained, I don't like it. How things get set up. How do we have to read Beowulf? Why can't we just read something that I want to read? However, Derek had a familiar response to reading the Iliad during the semester. Much of Derek's preferences for the Iliad can be linked to the change in teaching approach of Mr. Kegler in the Iliad instead of the method he employed while teaching Beowulf. Interacting with Black boys can enable teachers to gain some valuable insights into literacy practices. And the main point of Kirkland was the connection and understanding of Derek about the text and his ability to interpret the text as part of his self-expression. And Kirkland describes Derek, who says he's one of his classmates, presumably another Black boy. Nigga, I'm Achilles. While talking, the other student, Tony, responds to Derek, nigga, you ain't Achilles, you a hope like Paris. And I definitely see that in a classroom. It would be, you're right, that would be a total tweet. How can we start to, because I think we're getting to a stage, took us a while, right? Where anti-racist teaching is the new catchphrase.
Right.
All of education, which is great. Have your book clubs. Good job. But in the classroom, how do we stop? Now, I'm not even going to say turn the tide, but just stop manipulating and invalidating almost anybody, but especially our Black boys, with language.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to what I stated earlier regarding what we hold to be the standard. So, there is a settled expectation of what is knowledge, whose knowledge counts, and who gets to determine what that knowledge is and why it counts. And the powers that be decided that Black self-expression is not knowledge, and it's something that should not be valued. And so therefore, how you express yourself in whatever capacity, that's not proper. That's not academic. And so it's not that Black boys don't know how to read or don't know how to express themselves or can't process information and explain and answer questions, is that they don't do it in the way that you want them to do it because it doesn't meet your post-colonial white middle class standards. And in that example there, again, and lots of different people will take issue with the language that the student uses in that quote, but put that aside, what we find is that the student not only understood the text, but was able to internalize it and make those personal connections. And if that isn't learning, I don't know what is.
Right.
So, we can have another discussion as to whether or not the use of the N-word, as that student did, is appropriate or not. And I'm using the word appropriate in the loosest possible way, again, going back to my earlier statement, because the powers that be have determined that that is an inappropriate word. And it may or may not be. But what we get from that piece is Black boys know how to read, they want to read, they can learn, they can understand. It has to be relevant to them. And we also need to be willing and open to allow them to express themselves that in a way that represents their own funds of knowledge. And as long as we continue to say that the post-colonial white middle class standard in schools, which also includes self-expression, is the only way, then folks who don't meet that standard will always be seen from a point of deficit.
Indeed. And I almost think it goes back to our conversation on resiliency, right?
Yeah.
We've created an entire curriculum for, let's say, we'll include kindergarten, 13 years. The Black child has to be resilient, to push through, to even try to engage with, let alone, learn, master, proficiency, all these big words that we like to throw around. And I've often wondered, when we say, oh, he's so resilient, did he have to be at 9 years old though?
Should he be?
Right. Should he
be to be at that age? And the answer is no.
Exactly.
Because other children are not. When other children are allowed to be children. I can recall distinctively in my career a teacher saying to a parent that she felt threatened by her Black son, who was a harmless young man, but because he's Black and he's tall and he was imposing, and she felt threatened. And if he stood close to her in the future, she would call the police. Oh, wow. And it was I had to end the meeting because the mom went crazy, right, as a Black mom. And the teacher just didn't get it. It took us several conversations for her to get it. And we think about what we see in the news, in the, Black children being killed for doing what other children do and walk away from it because they're allowed to be children. But when you are a Black child, you're not seen as a child, and you're not treated as such. Indeed.
And that leads us to another question about African-American male theory. So I got really excited whenever I see AAMT in a paper, I get excited because I kind of stumbled upon it maybe last year or so, right in a book chapter. And I was like, this is brilliant. This makes perfect sense. And I really like how you pay honor and homage to critical race theory, but kind of continue and expand on the founders of AAMT when they talk about how critical race theory is great, yes, but it does not capture the experience of being a Black male. Right. So can you kind of walk us through using AAMT in this chapter and how it kind of supports and strengthens things throughout?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately what AAMT does is to provide a theory that is specific to the Black male experience. Critical race theory is great. There's a lot of other theories out there that are great, but there's just not any, to my knowledge, outside of AAMT that is specific to the unique experience of the Black male, specifically in American society. And after doing a lot of different research, that's ultimately why I landed on African-American male theory. And I think I would encourage more scholars to explore that as well. Again, critical race theory is great, and it's gotten us to where we are right now. But that the Black male experience is a very unique one.
Yes.
As I kind of document, I mean, we here make up the majority of folks in prison cells. Uh, we are dying exponentially faster than other groups of people, as we see in the news. We are celebrated in one regard for our athletic prowess, but demonized at the same time, because in a school setting, of course, you're the captain of the football team, but I bet you won't get your grades up, you know? So it's just a unique experience.
It is.
It's hard to navigate.
And then you've in your section between race and learning, the intersection between race and learning. I need to put my glasses on where I put them. You wrote that there is no separating culture and learning. Intelligence, ability, smartness, proficiency, learning, mastery, etc., are all measures of success and achievement determined by the dominant group members within a society. Leonardo and Broderick in 2011 assert that the term smartness, as we know it, is both false and oppressive, and is based on societal constructs and the dominant group and the ideology of whiteness, as opposed to proven science. Per the authors, smartness is just another social label that provides social credibility and capital to those who hold the title. I really liked how you phrased that, especially there is no separating culture and learning. And it reminds me of how I think Zaretta Hammond defines culture. It's really just how you interpret existing.
Mm-hmm.
Are you engaged with the external world? Is your culture? And if we kind of take both of those kind of ideas and you're looking at any child in a classroom, their individual culture is going to greatly impact and influence what they like, what they don't like, what naturally, comes easy, what they're going to need a little help with, if they even ask for help, what that looks like, right?
Correct.
All of that. I mean, it's everything. So I really like how you didn't even entertain the notion that we were going to separate these two, because we can't.
Well, so a couple of thoughts on that. Right? If you subscribe to the idea that we are co-constructors of our learning in the way that I do, then yes, obviously you can't separate learning from culture, because if you're co-constructing your learning, your knowledge, your culture is going to help to inform that. Right. So they are intertwined. In a very practical way, in terms of like how trying to separate that becomes oppressive. Again, thinking about my experience as well, having non-Black teachers say to our students around, for example, young ladies. I can remember at a school, a young lady being punished for the earrings that she was wearing. They were hoops, and it was, that is ghetto, and that is not appropriate for a professional setting. And so you can wear earrings, but they can't be larger than the size of a nickel. And so, okay, on surface level, that seems very innocuous, right? Like we have school rules, we have a dress code, and follow the dress code. But let's unpack that. This young girl who goes home every day to her mom sees her mom dressed in this particular attire and probably idolizes her mom and tries to emulate that. Her mom presumably wears hoop earrings to work as well. In that conversation with that student, what is the message that you are also delivering to not just this student's mom, but what she observes in her culture every single day, that her aunt, her grandmother, her next door neighbor, and all the other women who in her world who look like her, how they present themselves, right? Like what is, like, what is the inherent message or the undertone of messaging that you are providing to that young lady when you say that to her, right?
Mhm.
Like, oh, your style of dress is not academic. There is nothing intellectual behind it. It is not professional. It is not appropriate for things that matter, for
Mhm.
things that are of great consequence, like thinking and doing tasks, right? In fact, it is a distraction from doing that. It might be appropriate if you're on the corner or something, but where it matters in an academic setting, it doesn't. And so then we begin to wonder why, for a lot of, in particular, Black males, there is this disconnect from the academic setting, right? When the people who are celebrated in schools don't look like you either by race or gender. The people who are responsible for teaching you largely don't look like you by race, and definitely not by gender. And the people who are responsible for running these institutions where you're supposed to learn don't look like you by race or gender, nor are they celebrated people like you by race or gender. Then at what point do you begin to take on the idea that, yeah, I can find success here, this is where I belong, and have a self of belongingness to that environment? The reality is that they don't,
Mhm.
for the reasons that I just named. And so we really have to be careful around the type of language we use and how and what kind of undertones that we're sending to our students there.
I really like how you talked about belongingness there, because I was almost thinking, I was reflecting on some students I had way back in the early part of my teaching career. One, they were amazed that somebody with some brown skin was in the classroom. They're like, "Wait, who are you? What are you doing? Why are you here?"
Right.
Especially in the self-contained special ed
Mm-hmm.
setting, they're like, "Whoa, hold on." But it almost became a thing where once we started really wrestling with the curriculum, and of course, I'm going to make it relative to them. It was the first time that they were using words like "I'm a scholar," like that identity was being born, cultivated. I can't think of the word right now. Where it was like for the past 7 or 8 years of their school career, they just went to this place 5 days a week because they had to. Food was all right, you know. And I went home, but they never identified themselves as intelligent, smart, creative, resilient, scholar, like nothing. And it goes directly back to your point. It's the language we use, even in the cutesy posters we've got in the hallways, and
Mm-hmm.
and what we're naming theme weeks and stuff like that. It's like, guys, how are you? Did we step back before we put the hit print on this one? Because
Mm-hmm. Which is why representation is important, right?
definitely.
Like you have to see yourself in other things to believe that it's possible for you. But even outside of that, like, let's just boil it down to something that uh, most educators take as gospel. Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Mm,
right? And how do we expect students or Black male students to have that sense of belongingness if they don't feel safe? And
right,
maybe they feel safe physically, but they certainly don't feel safe emotionally,
right.
right? So how do we expect them to then have the motivation to learn, to really be their authentic selves, to feel that sense of belongingness? And whenever I'm engaged in conversations around DEI, I always say DEIB, right? Like,
Mhm.
not only is it important um, that we include folks need to feel a sense of belongingness.
Right.
Right now, in my opinion, a big part of why we are where we are as a nation is because there are folks who don't believe that we belong. And so when they make laws, when they do certain things, they're not done with us in mind, because we're not a true stakeholder, because we don't belong.
Right.
And that's where we need to get to,
Mm,
not inclusion, but belongingness. When we feel that everyone here belongs, then we stop doing things solely through our perspective, but we think about the fact that everyone here belongs. and then we act accordingly, in my opinion.
Definitely. That was a powerful statement there, sir. So I wish I had more time for more questions and whatnot. We could talk about this all day. You wrote a chapter that is overflowing with authenticity, accountability. Who the accountability in this chapter, and ways forward. You didn't know, just say this is what's wrong, but you gave us ways forward. So, what are some ways that people can start to engage with this work and with you further down the road?
Well, firstly, buy the book when it's published, and read it. Not just my chapter. What was there? 20 chapters.
23.
23 chapters. I've had the opportunity to see what these chapters are about, and I think it's going to be phenomenal. It is my hope that this book is something that will be used in teacher preparation programs to create the next generation of teachers who are going into our classrooms, predominantly urban classrooms, predominantly classrooms serving Black and Brown folks, in which there are some serious issues of inequity. So that's one way I would advocate for people to engage with this work and to engage with me. Certainly, you can find me on LinkedIn to engage professionally. And if there are opportunities to present, to be on a panel or anything like that, I'm always happy to discuss. But, we need the folks who claim to be allies to actually be allies. And not just be allies when we're in the room, but also be allies when we're not in the room, which is usually when real decisions are made.
Right.
So if nothing else, be a true ally. And a part of that means that you're going to support good work when it's there. So when this book is available in January, it's my hope that everyone's reading it and taking it back to their schools and doing book studies on this, and teacher preparation programs are sifting through it and making sure that the next generation of teachers that they're producing understand ways to combat deficit thinking, and let's really improve racial equity, specifically in education.
Outstanding. Well, thank you for your time. And
My pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Your name in that book.
Absolutely. I'm very excited. Thank you for leading us through this work and everything that you do. I'm sure it's not an easy task, but you're doing an amazing job. And shout out to all my other co-authors for their respective chapters. I am looking forward to the final product.
Awesome. You have a good night, sir.
Thank you. Much appreciated. You too.